The cemetery shift. Ethan Reynolds never planned on working in a cemetery. But life had a way of forcing people into places they didn't belong. When he lost his job at the factory, he took the first one he could find, night security at Black Hollow Cemetery. It paid well enough, and all he had to do was walk the grounds a few times, watch the security monitors, and make sure no one was trespassing. "Easy job," his supervisor had said, handing him the keys on his first night. "Just stay in the office unless something weird happens. And if you see anything near the back section," he hesitated, "just ignore it." That last part stuck with Ethan. The cemetery was massive, stretching for acres, filled with headstones so old they had crumbled into moss-covered lumps. Black Hollow had been around for almost 150 years, and most of the people buried there had no family left to visit. Ethan figured his biggest problem would be boredom. For the first week, he was right. The place was eerily quiet at night, but nothing unusual happened. Then came night 7. At 2:37 a.m., Ethan noticed something strange on the security monitors. The camera feed for Section D, the oldest part of the cemetery, flickered. The image distorted for a second, and when it cleared, he saw something that made his breath catch. One of the graves had changed. It was small, an unmarked headstone, just a slab of weathered stone with no name, but the soil in front of it was loose, freshly disturbed. That didn't make sense. He had passed by there on his patrol an hour ago, and everything had been fine. Maybe some teenagers were messing around. That was common in old cemeteries, right? Kids dared each other to visit at night, knock over a few headstones, spray some graffiti. Grabbing his flashlight, Ethan stepped outside. The air was thick, the kind of humidity that made it hard to breathe. A layer of fog had rolled in, curling between the graves like fingers. He walked toward Section D, his boots crunching over dead leaves. The headstones around him stood crooked in the dirt, some split in half, like something had tried to claw its way out. When he reached the unmarked grave, his stomach tightened. The soil wasn't just disturbed, it looked like something had been dragged out of it. Long, uneven marks stretched away from the grave, disappearing into the fog. Ethan shivered. A rustling sound came from behind him. He spun around, his flashlight beam cutting through the fog. Nothing. Just graves stretching into the darkness. Then the wind picked up, carrying a sound that made his blood turn to ice. A faint scratching, slow, uneven, coming from beneath the ground. Ethan took a shaky step back. His pulse hammered in his ears. The scratching stopped. Silence. Then a hand broke through the dirt. Pale, thin, fingers bent at unnatural angles, nails jagged and blackened. Ethan's breath hitched. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a headstone. The hand twitched. Then, as if realizing it had been seen, it jerked downward, yanked back into the grave. The soil collapsed over it, smooth as if nothing had ever happened. Ethan ran. He didn't stop until he was locked inside the security office, panting. His heart slammed against his ribs as he checked the monitors again. The grave was normal, no loose soil, no hand, like it had never happened. Night 8. Ethan didn't want to come back, but he needed the job. Rent wasn't going to pay itself. At 2:37 a.m., he forced himself to check the cameras. His hands trembled as he switched to Section D's feed. His stomach dropped. The grave was disturbed again. A sinking feeling crept into his chest. He wasn't imagining this, but this time something was different. There were footprints in the dirt, leading away from the grave. He turned up the volume on the feed. The night was silent, except for the faint crunch of leaves, like something was walking. His fingers hovered over the radio. He could call his supervisor, tell him something was wrong. But before he could, the security lights outside flickered. Then, tap, tap, tap. Ethan froze. The sound was coming from the window. Slowly, his gaze shifted. A figure stood outside, half hidden in the fog. Thin, too thin. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, bones jutting beneath stretched grey skin. It had no eyes, just dark, sunken pits where they should be. And it was smiling. Ethan's throat locked. He couldn't move. Then the thing raised its hand, the same hand that had clawed out of the grave, and pressed it against the glass. A horrible, wet sound. A handprint smeared across the window, but it wasn't blood, it was dirt. The figure's mouth twitched, then slowly it turned and walked back toward the graveyard. Ethan watched, paralyzed, as it disappeared into the fog. The next morning he quit, but curiosity got the best of him. He went to the town archives, searching for records on the unmarked grave. Black Hollow Cemetery, burial record, 1903. No name, no birth date, just a note. Body removed from the ground multiple times, reburied each time. Do not disturb. Ethan slammed the book shut. He never went back to the cemetery. But some nights at 2:37 a.m. he woke up gasping, his fingers caked with dirt. And sometimes, just outside his window, he heard it. Tap, tap, tap.